The air was a noxious cocktail of ozone, spent gunpowder, and the acrid tang of burnt rubber. Elena Vance, off-duty ER nurse, gripped the steering wheel of her Honda Civic, pressing her foot uselessly against the brake. Sirens had screamed past her a mile back, forcing her into a detour through the city's forgotten industrial heartland, a labyrinth of abandoned warehouses and graffiti-scarred brick. Now her car was trapped, boxed in by a haphazard perimeter of police cruisers, their strobes painting the desolate landscape in frantic flashes of red and blue. A few yards ahead, a tactical team swarmed what looked like a meth lab, shouts echoing, followed by the sickening thud of a breach. Suddenly, a figure stumbled out of the haze, collapsing near Elena's car. An officer, his face pale beneath a smear of grime, clutching his leg. Instinct, honed by years in the ER, took over. Before she could consciously think, Elena had killed her engine, yanked open her door, and was sprinting towards him. "I'm a nurse!" she yelled over the cacophony, already assessing the situation. A deep laceration on his thigh, arterial bleed evident in the pulsing rhythm. "Pressure now," she commanded, grabbing his hand and guiding it to the wound, her own fingers already tearing at his uniform to get a better look. Other officers, now securing the suspect, cast bewildered glances her way, but no one stopped her. She was a force of nature, a calm in the storm, doing what she did best. The chaos gradually subsided. The suspect was cuffed and led away. Paramedics descended, their gurneys rolling, their focus entirely on the human casualties. Elena, her heart still thrumming from the adrenaline, ensured the officer she'd assisted was stable before releasing him into their care. She started to turn back to her car, her shoulders aching, ready for the quiet oblivion of her apartment. That's when she saw it. Near the crumbling foundation of the warehouse, amidst discarded tactical gear and spent shell casings, a German shepherd lay in a crumpled heap. It wasn't moving. Its intelligent brown eyes, usually alight with canine alertness, were half-closed, glazed with pain and shock. A dark, rapidly expanding stain blossomed on its side, soaking into the thick, protective vest it wore. It was K-9 Rex, Elena vaguely remembered hearing over the police radio, the dog that had cornered the suspect, taking a knife meant for its handler. "Hey!" Elena shouted, her voice cutting through the waning tension. "The dog! He's bleeding!" Officer Miller, Rex's handler, his face etched with exhaustion and a freshly broken wrist cradled against his chest, glanced dismissively at the animal. "It's fine," he grunted, already turning to talk to the paramedics who were loading his human colleagues. "Animal control will get it." The words hit Elena like a physical blow. "It's fine? Animal control will get it?" The dog was fading, its breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. Its flank was slick with blood, and the pool beneath it was growing steadily larger. This wasn't a minor injury. It was a critical, life-threatening wound, and its handler, the man whose life this animal had just saved, was dismissing it like a broken tool. A cold, hard knot of fury tightened in Elena's stomach. This wasn't animal control will get it territory. This was ER now territory. She had seen similar injuries in humans, and she knew the signs. Shock, hypovolemia, imminent collapse. The paramedics, their backs to the dog, were focused on a head injury and a sprained ankle. The other officers were already packing up, their faces grim, ready to debrief. No one was looking at Rex, truly looking at him. No one but her. Elena felt a primal surge of protectiveness, familiar from countless nights in the ER when a patient, too weak or too young or too confused, couldn't advocate for themselves. This animal had given everything, and now it was being abandoned. "He's my patient now," Elena declared, the words ringing with an authority she didn't know she possessed. She didn't wait for an answer. Dropping to her knees beside the motionless dog, she tore open her emergency fanny pack, pulling out a pair of trauma shears she always kept, just in case. With swift, decisive movements, she cut through the heavy-duty fabric of Rex's vest, revealing the gruesome stab wound. It was deep, gushing, far worse than she'd imagined. "Does anyone have gauze? A clean cloth?" she barked, not looking up. The officers nearest her stared, dumbfounded. One fumbled for a first aid kit, pulling out a sterile gauze pad. Elena snatched it, pressing it firmly against the wound, feeling the warm, sticky gush of blood against her palm. Rex whimpered, a soft, pathetic sound, but didn't struggle. His body was already going into shock. His only hope, she knew, was aggressive intervention and rapid transport. and judging by the dismissive attitude of his handler, she was it. The gauze was already soaked through, a crimson blotter against the dog's dark fur. Elena's mind raced, cycling through a mental checklist. Find the source of the bleeding, apply direct pressure, treat for shock, get him to an operating room. The last part was the problem. A gray-haired sergeant with weary eyes and a name tag that read Kowalski approached her, his expression a mixture of pity and official displeasure. "Ma'am, I appreciate what you're trying to do," he began, his voice a low, tired rumble. "But you need to stop. This animal is evidence. It's also department property. We have procedures for this." Elena didn't look up from her patient. Rex's breathing was getting shallower. "His procedure is a thoracotomy, Sergeant, and if he doesn't get it in the next 20 minutes, your department property is going to be a corpse." "Is there a veterinary ambulance on its way?" Kowalski shifted his weight, the leather of his duty belt creaking. "Animal control has been notified. They'll handle the transport." "Animal control?" Elena's head snapped up, her eyes blazing. "They're not equipped for this level of trauma. This is a penetrating chest wound, possibly involving the lung or spleen. He needs a surgeon, not a kennel on wheels. You wouldn't send a human with this injury to a walk-in clinic." "He's not a human," Kowalski stated flatly, and the simple, brutal finality of the statement solidified Elena's resolve. The wall of bureaucracy was slamming down, its bricks made of procedure and its mortar of indifference. She could argue here until Rex bled out, or she could act. "I need help getting him to my car," she said, her voice dropping the pleading tone and adopting the clipped, commanding cadence of the ER. "Now," Kowalski held up his hands. "I can't authorize that, ma'am. You're interfering with a police scene. I'm asking you nicely to step away from the K-9. "Fine. I'm not asking." With a grunt, Elena slid one arm under Rex's chest and the other under his hind legs. He was heavier than he looked, a dead weight of muscle and bone, at least 80 pounds. She staggered to her feet, her back screaming in protest. The dog let out a low moan, his head lolling against her shoulder. The officers around her just stared, a silent circle of blue uniforms and conflicted expressions. She saw it in their eyes, the discomfort, the flicker of shame, but also the unwillingness to defy a direct order from their superior. They wouldn't help her, but in that moment, they wouldn't stop her either. It was a gray area, just wide enough for her to slip through. Every step to her car was a monumental effort. Blood, warm and sticky, seeped through her jeans and dripped from her elbow onto the grimy asphalt. She fumbled with her car door, finally managing to wrench it open before carefully, painstakingly, lowering the massive dog onto her beige cloth passenger seat. The upholstery, which she'd just had detailed last week, instantly turned a sickening shade of rust. She didn't care. She ripped a clean towel from her gym bag in the back and pressed it hard against the wound before slamming the door, running around to the driver's side, and jumping in. The engine roared to life. As she peeled away from the curb, she saw Kowalski in her rearview mirror, speaking furiously into his radio, his face a mask of official indignation. The drive was a frantic blur of red lights and blaring horns. Elena drove with one hand on the wheel, the other pressed firmly on Rex's side, trying to staunch the bleeding. His breaths were faint, his gums pale, classic signs of hemorrhagic shock. A vet clinic was out of the question. Even the 24-hour emergency animal hospital across town would be a roll of the dice. They might not have a surgeon on call, might not have the blood products, might not have the sophisticated monitoring equipment she knew he needed. But Street Michael's General did. It was her hospital, her turf, a place of healing. And it was 5 minutes away. It was a wild, career-ending gamble, but it was Rex's only shot. She screeched to a halt in the ambulance bay, ignoring the designated ambulances only sign, and threw the car in park. Hoisting the dog into her arms again, the adrenaline making him feel both impossibly heavy and terrifyingly light, she shouldered her way through the automatic glass doors of the emergency department. The familiar, controlled chaos of the ER came to a screeching halt. Heads turned. Conversations stopped. The triage nurse, Brenda, a woman who'd seen everything from gunshot wounds to lawn dart impalements, gaped at her. "Elena? What in God's name?" "I need a gurney and I need to get him to a trauma bay," Elena gasped, her muscles trembling with the strain. Penetrating chest wound, severe hemorrhage going into shock. Brenda held up her hands, her eyes wide with a mixture of horror and disbelief. "Elena, you know we can't. It's a dog. Policy is absolute on this. Think of the contamination risk. The other patients. He's a police dog, Brenda, and he's dying on your floor," Elena countered, her voice cracking with desperation. "Just get me a gurney." But it was too late. The commotion had drawn the one person Elena had hoped to avoid. Mr. Davies, the hospital administrator, who was unfortunately doing one of his late-night rounds. Davies was a man who seemed to have been born in a perfectly tailored suit. His silver hair was immaculate, his posture ramrod straight, and his face was permanently arranged in an expression of mild, disappointed condescension. He didn't see patients, he saw liability risks. He didn't see doctors and nurses, he saw assets and liabilities. And right now, he was looking at Elena as the biggest liability he'd seen all year. Nurse Vance. His voice was soft, but it cut through the ER chatter like a scalpel. It wasn't the voice of a man who was angry. It was the voice of a man who was profoundly, fundamentally disappointed. "Explain to me, if you can, why there is a bleeding animal in my emergency department." "Mr. Davies, this is K-9 Officer Rex," Elena said, struggling to keep her voice even while her arms felt like they were about to fall off. "He was stabbed in the line of duty. He needs surgery, immediately." Davies walked closer, his expensive shoes clicking on the linoleum. He didn't look at the dog. He looked at the blood pooling on the pristine floor. "I am aware of our policy regarding animals on hospital grounds, Nurse Vance, and I am quite certain you are too. This facility is for the treatment of human beings. Bringing an animal in here is a gross violation of sanitation protocols, a potential vector for disease, and a legal and financial nightmare I cannot even begin to calculate." He ticked the points off on his fingers, as if giving a lecture. "What if another patient is allergic? What if the animal is rabid? What if it bites a member of staff? You have exposed this entire hospital to an unacceptable level of risk." "He's a police officer," Elena insisted, her voice rising. "He's vaccinated, he's trained, and he's dying. Are we really going to stand here and debate policy while he bleeds to death?" "We are going to adhere to policy," Davies corrected her, his voice still unnervingly calm. "Because policy is what separates a respected medical institution from a back-alley clinic. It is what protects our patients and our staff. Your sentimentality, while perhaps understandable, is dangerously misplaced. Now I am ordering you to remove the animal from these premises. Immediately." It was a standoff. Elena, trembling with exertion and righteous fury, holding a dying hero. Davies, immaculate and unmoving, the personification of cold, unyielding bureaucracy. The seconds stretched into an eternity. Elena knew she had lost. She couldn't fight him. Security would be called. She'd be escorted out, and Rex would die in her car. "What's his pressure?" The new voice, calm and inquisitive, came from behind Davies. Dr. Alistair Chen, the hospital's head of trauma surgery, emerged from the doctor's lounge, a half-empty mug of coffee in his hand. He was a small, unassuming man in his late 50s, but he commanded more respect than anyone in the hospital. He had a reputation for being unflappable, brilliant, and utterly uninterested in hospital politics. "Dr. Chen," Davies began, turning slightly, "this is an internal matter. Nurse Vance was just leaving." Dr. Chen ignored him, his sharp, intelligent eyes fixed on Rex. He knelt beside Elena, his gaze clinical and focused. "Looks like a chest wound, possibly a diaphragmatic hernia. Any abdominal distension?" "I haven't been able to check," Elena stammered, shocked. "His pulse is thready, gums are white." Dr. Chen nodded, a thoughtful expression on his face. He gently prodded Rex's abdomen, his experienced fingers searching for signs of internal bleeding. He looked up, not at Elena, but directly at the fuming administrator. "Mr. Davies," he said, his tone casual but carrying an undeniable weight of authority. "This dog is a sworn officer of the law. Allowing a fellow officer to die on our doorstep because of a logistical inconvenience would be a PR nightmare far worse than any sanitation issue." He stood up, wiping his hand on a sanitizer wipe he produced from his pocket. "I'm treating this as a foreign body retrieval and organ repair on a non-traditional patient. It's a fascinating medical challenge. Send him to OR 3. I'll need a full surgical team and tell the blood bank we might need to cross-match O negative. I'll take full responsibility." Davies' jaw tightened. He was being outmaneuvered, his precious protocol dismantled by a simple, elegant reframing of the situation. To argue further would be to argue against the hospital's most revered surgeon in front of the entire ER staff. He was trapped. His cold eyes locked onto Elena's. "This isn't over, Vance," he hissed, his voice a low, venomous promise. "When this circus is finished, you and I are going to have a very long conversation about your future at this hospital. Or lack thereof." He then turned on his heel and strode away, his fury a palpable force left in his wake. Elena didn't care. As two orderlies rushed forward with a gurney, their expressions now ones of awed curiosity, she felt a wave of dizzying relief. She helped them transfer Rex onto the stretcher, his body limp but still breathing. As they wheeled him towards the operating rooms, Dr. Chen gave her a small, conspiratorial wink. "Good instincts, nurse," he said quietly. "Now, let's go save our patient." The surgical waiting room was a sterile beige purgatory. Elena sat on the edge of a vinyl chair, the fabric sticking to her blood-smeared jeans. The adrenaline from the past hour had evaporated, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion and a gnawing, acidic anxiety. Every swing of the double doors from the hallway made her jump. She was a ghost in her own hospital, a pariah in scrubs, waiting for news of a patient she had no right to have. Her hands were trembling, not from cold, but from the sheer, overwhelming weight of her decision. She had thrown a grenade into her own life, and she was just waiting for it to explode. The explosion arrived in the form of Officer Miller. He stormed into the waiting room, his good hand balled into a fist, his face a thundercloud of bruised pride and raw fury. His cast looked less like a medical necessity and more like a prop for his righteous indignation. He strode directly to her, ignoring the handful of other people in the room, his voice booming with manufactured outrage. "There you are," he spat, standing over her. "You've got some nerve. Who the hell do you think you are?" Elena stood up slowly, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "I'm the person who's trying to save your partner's life," she said, her voice low and steady despite the tremor in her hands. "My property," Miller corrected her, jabbing a finger in her direction. "My $10,000 piece of department equipment that you stole from a crime scene. You obstructed a police investigation, you tampered with evidence, and you went on some crazy, self-righteous crusade just so you could play the hero." He was bleeding out on the pavement. Elena shot back, her own anger beginning to simmer. "He had minutes to live. There was no crusade, officer. It was a medical decision." "Medical decision?" He laughed, a short, ugly bark of a sound. "You're not a vet. You're a nurse who decided to go rogue. Now I've got my sergeant breathing down my neck, and the whole department thinks I can't control my own K-9 unit because of you. I want it back. Now. I'm taking it to the department-approved vet." The sheer absurdity of his demand, to move a critically injured animal in the middle of major surgery, was breathtaking. "That's not possible. He's in surgery. Dr. Chen is operating." "I don't care who's operating." Miller's voice rose to a shout, causing the other occupants of the waiting room to stare openly, their phones subtly rising to record the confrontation. "I am his handler, and I am ordering you to have them stop and release my property into my custody." This was the moment Elena's last shred of respect for him vanished. He wasn't just callous, he was dangerously ignorant. "You want them to stop a thoracic surgery midway through? Do you have any idea what that means? You'll kill him." "He's probably going to die anyway," Miller yelled. "But he'll do it under my authority, not yours." The argument was a blur of accusation and desperate medical reasoning. But Elena knew she wasn't talking to a rational person. She was talking to a wounded ego, a man more concerned with the chain of command than the life of the loyal animal that had served him. Just as their fight reached its peak, a calm, chilling voice cut through the noise. "That's quite enough." Mr. Davies stood at the entrance to the waiting room, flanked by two burly hospital security guards. His expression was no longer one of disappointment. It was one of cold, reptilian satisfaction. He had found his leverage. "Officer Miller," Davies said, his voice oozing a placating sympathy. "I want to apologize on behalf of Street Michael's General for the unprofessional actions of this employee. We are taking the matter very seriously." He then turned his glacial gaze on Elena. "Nurse Vance, as you can see, your reckless stunt has resulted in a significant disruption and has brought a police incident onto hospital grounds, endangering staff and patients alike. This is a flagrant violation of Sections 4B, 7A, and 11C of your employment contract pertaining to hospital conduct, insubordination, and the unauthorized introduction of biological contaminants." He was reciting the code sections from memory. He had been preparing for this. "Effective immediately. You are suspended without pay, pending a full board review. Given the circumstances, I think we both know the inevitable outcome of that review." He gestured to one of the guards. "Frank will escort you to your locker to collect your personal belongings. You will surrender your ID badge and pager. You are then to vacate the premises immediately. You are no longer welcome at this hospital." The words hit her like a physical blow, knocking the air from her lungs. Suspended. Fired, essentially. Her career, the one thing she had built her entire life around, was being dismantled in a beige waiting room because she'd refused to let a dog die. "You can't do that," she whispered, the fight draining out of her. "I can, and I have," Davies said with chilling finality. "Furthermore, I have already been in contact with the state nursing board. I will be filing a formal complaint regarding your gross misconduct. Your license to practice medicine in this state is now in jeopardy." He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You should have just let the dog die, Elena. It would have been so much easier for everyone." That was the final twist of the knife. Humiliation washed over her as Frank, the security guard, a man she'd shared coffee with 100 times, stepped forward, his face apologetic but firm. "Elena, I need your badge." Her walk through the ER was a blur of averted eyes and sudden, intense interest in clipboards. Her colleagues, her friends, watched as she was marched through the department like a criminal. She felt like a specimen under a microscope, the subject of 1,000 hushed conversations that would start the moment she was out the door. She dropped her badge into Frank's hand at the exit, the clatter of the plastic on the counter sounding like a gavel ending her life's work. As the automatic doors slid open, she was met by a barrage of flashing lights. A news van was parked haphazardly at the curb. A reporter, a young woman with predatory eyes, shoved a microphone in her face. "Miss Vance, is it true you've been fired for stealing a police K-9 and bringing it to the hospital?" Behind the reporter, Elena could see Miller and Davies standing together, giving a joint statement, their faces grim and authoritative. They were controlling the narrative, painting her as an unstable, hysterical woman who had gone off the rails. "Did you endanger patients by bringing a contaminated animal into the ER?" the reporter pressed. "Witnesses say you assaulted an officer. Do you have a comment?" Blinded by the lights and deafened by the questions, Elena could only shake her head and push past, her face burning with shame. She stumbled away, the reporter's voice following her. There you have it, the nurse at the center of the Street Michael's chaos, refusing to comment on her actions. She fled across the street to a 24-hour diner, the only sanctuary she could find. Sliding into a cracked vinyl booth, she watched the local news playing on the small TV mounted in the corner. Her own face stared back at her. A shaky cell phone video, clearly filmed by someone in the waiting room, showed her yelling at Officer Miller. It was grainy, the audio distorted, but it looked terrible. It was a snippet of her frustration, stripped of all context. The chyron beneath read, "Hospital in Chaos. Nurse fired after bizarre standoff over police dog." The online comments scrolling on the bottom of the screen were a torrent of venom. "Crazy petanut. She should be arrested. Fire her and sue her for the vet bills." The world had already tried and convicted her. She dropped her head into her hands, the cold reality crashing down on her. She had lost everything. A few minutes later, the bell above the diner door jingled. A police officer walked in, but his uniform was different, his demeanor gentler than Miller's. He scanned the room, his eyes landing on Elena. He approached her booth slowly, holding his hands up in a placating gesture. "Elena Vance?" he asked, his voice quiet and respectful. She looked up, bracing for another confrontation. "What do you want? My name is Officer Rodriguez." "Ben Rodriguez." He slid into the booth opposite her. "I was Rex's first handler. I trained him from a pup." His face was etched with a profound sadness. "I saw the news. I heard what Miller did at the scene. I wanted to say thank you, and I'm sorry." Elena stared at him, bewildered. "Sorry? For Miller, for the department, for all of this?" He gestured to the TV. "That's not the story. That's not what happened." He leaned forward, his eyes intense. "I need you to know that the dog you saved isn't just a piece of equipment. I was with him for 5 years before I made detective. That dog found a 3-year-old girl who wandered into the state forest during a snowstorm. He laid down next to her to keep her warm until we got there. He once sniffed out a fertilizer bomb in the basement of a middle school 2 hours before the first bell. He's a hero, a real one." Tears pricked at Elena's eyes, the first she'd allowed herself to shed. Hearing about the life she had fought for, the being at the center of this storm, was a balm to her shattered spirit. "Miller," Rodriguez sighed, shaking his head. "He got Rex because he had seniority, not because he had a heart. He's always seen him as a tool. What you did? It was the right thing to do. It was the only thing to do." He pulled out his phone. I've already spoken to my captain. I've also requested the body cam footage from the other officers on scene. The real story is going to come out. I'm going to make sure of it. You're not alone in this. As Rodriguez spoke, a different kind of drama was unfolding a few hundred yards away under the sterile lights of Operating Room 3. Dr. Chen, his face a mask of concentration behind his surgical loops, worked with the meticulous grace of a master craftsman. More suction, he commanded, his voice calm despite the tension. Pressure's dropping, doctor. 80/50, an anesthesiologist announced. The knife blade must have nicked the splenic artery when it punctured the diaphragm? Chen murmured, more to himself than to his team. That's our bleeder. His instruments moved with impossible speed and precision, clamping, tying off, repairing. For long moments, the only sounds were the soft squelch of instruments, the hiss of the ventilator, and the steady, rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor. Then, a new sound. A long, piercing tone. "He's in VFib!" a nurse shouted. "He's crashing!" Doctor. Chen looked up from his work, his eyes meeting the anesthesiologist's over the surgical mask. "Get the paddles," he ordered, his voice still impossibly calm. "We're not losing him." The 2 days that followed were a descent into a special kind of hell. Elena's small apartment, once her sanctuary, became a prison. She kept the blinds drawn against a world that had seemingly decided she was a villain. Her phone was a conduit for poison. She'd made the mistake of looking at her social media mentions once, and the torrent of hatred had been so vitriolic, so deeply personal, that she'd thrown the device across the room, feeling as if she'd been physically assaulted. Strangers sent her photos of their dogs, telling her she was a disgrace to animal lovers. Others sent death threats, accusing her of seeking fame at the expense of police procedure. Her email inbox was a digital dumpster fire. Her only companion was Buster, her scruffy terrier mix, who seemed to sense her despair. He rarely left her side, resting his warm, furry head on her knee, his gentle presence a silent testament to the very compassion that had ruined her life. She was disconnected from the world, cut off from the hospital grapevine. She had no idea if Rex was alive or dead. For all she knew, her monumental sacrifice had been for nothing, a futile gesture that had only succeeded in costing her everything she had ever worked for. On the third morning, the mail carrier pushed a certified letter through the slot in her door. The envelope was thick and official, bearing the crest of the State Board of Nursing. Her hands shook so badly she could barely sign for it. Sinking onto her couch, she tore it open. The language was cold, brutally bureaucratic. Formal notice of investigation, allegations of gross misconduct, unprofessional conduct, endangerment of public health. It was all there, a formal, itemized list of her failures, as documented by Mr. Davies. The letter concluded by informing her that a hearing was scheduled, the outcome of which could range from a formal reprimand to the permanent revocation of her nursing license. This was it, the final nail in the coffin of her career. She held the letter in her hand, the paper trembling. She was no longer Elena Vance, ER nurse. She was a case number, a cautionary tale. The weight of her isolation and the injustice of her situation pressed down on her, a crushing physical force. She closed her eyes, a single, hot tear tracing a path through the grime on her cheek. She had fought, and she had lost. Just as the last vestiges of her hope began to flicker and die, her phone buzzed on the coffee table. She flinched, expecting another wave of digital hate. But the caller ID read Ben Rodriguez. With a trembling finger, she answered. "Elena," his voice was urgent, charged with energy. "Are you watching the news?" "No," she croaked, her voice hoarse from disuse. "I can't. You need to. Turn on Channel 8. Right now. A journalist named Sarah Jenkins. I gave her everything. It's airing in 5 minutes." There was a pause. "And Elena? Whatever happens, thank you." He hung up. Her heart hammered against her ribs. With a sense of impending doom, she fumbled for the remote and turned on the television. After the commercial break, a serious-looking woman appeared on screen. "We have a developing story tonight," Sarah Jenkins said, her expression grim. For days, the city has been debating the actions of a local nurse, fired after a dramatic confrontation at St. Michael's General. She was accused of stealing a police dog and endangering patients. But tonight, new evidence has emerged that tells a very different story. What you are about to see is body camera footage from an officer at the scene. The screen flickered, and Elena was transported back to that smoky, chaotic warehouse district. The footage was clear, the audio crisp. It began by showing her own hands, working calmly and professionally on the injured officer's leg. Then, the camera panned across the scene, settling on Rex, bleeding on the ground. The audio was undeniable. Officer Miller's voice, laced with annoyance, came through sharp and clear. "It's a dog. Animal control will get it." The camera operator, another officer, had remained near the scene. His lens captured everything. It showed Elena's desperate plea for gauze, her expert application of first aid. It showed Sergeant Kowalski's by-the-book refusal to help. Most powerfully, it showed Elena's solitary, agonizing struggle to lift the 80-pound dog and carry him, step by painful step, to her car. She looked small and overwhelmed, but utterly determined. The footage was a silent, unassailable witness to her heroism. Sarah Jenkins returned to the screen. "As you can see," she said, her voice dripping with journalistic gravitas, "this was not an act of interference, but an act of intervention. We also obtained this cell phone footage from the hospital." The grainy video of Elena arguing with Miller flashed on screen. But now, with the proper context, it was completely reframed. Her anger no longer looked like unhinged hysteria. It looked like righteous, justified fury. The story concluded with a short, pre-recorded interview with a veterinary trauma surgeon from the state university. Based on the description of the injuries, the expert said, "The nurse's immediate actions to control the bleeding and provide rapid transport to a surgical facility, any surgical facility, almost certainly saved that animal's life. Waiting for animal control would have been a death sentence." The segment ended. Elena sat in stunned silence, the remote clattering from her numb fingers. The truth was out. And then, the internet erupted. Her phone began to vibrate, not with hate, but with a tidal wave of support. The hashtag, #HeroNurse, exploded on Twitter, trending nationally within minutes. News sites that had vilified her rushed to post the new footage, their headlines now screaming her praises. Her social media, once a cesspool of hate, transformed into a wall of overwhelming gratitude. "Elena Vance is a hero," one comment read. "Fire Miller and give her his job," said another. "I'm a cop and she did what we should have done." "Thank you, Nurse Vance." In the middle of the digital storm, her phone rang with an unknown number. Hesitantly, she answered. "Vance," she said. "It's Alistair Chen." Her breath caught in her throat. "Dr. Chen? Is he?" "He's awake," the surgeon said, his voice warm and kind. "He's groggy and sore, but his vitals are stable. We moved him out of the ICU an hour ago. He's going to make it, Elena." There was a pause. "I'm not supposed to be telling you this. You're not technically on this case, but you're the reason he has a case to be on. Your initial pressure dressing was perfect. You saved his life before he ever got to my operating table." This time, the tears that came were tears of pure, unadulterated relief. She sobbed into the phone, incoherent words of thanks, and Dr. Chen just listened patiently on the other end. The institutional dominoes began to fall that evening. The police chief, a man with a politician's sensitivity to public opinion, called an emergency press conference. Looking grim and humbled, he announced that Officer Miller had been placed on indefinite administrative leave pending a full internal affairs investigation into not only the events of that night, but his entire service record as a K-9 handler. The chief concluded his statement by publicly thanking the brave and compassionate citizen whose swift medical action saved the life of a decorated officer of this department. Less than an hour later, St. Michael's General Hospital released a statement of its own. It was a masterclass in corporate backtracking, a symphony of strategic pivots. Mr. Davies was nowhere to be seen. The statement, released under the hospital's letterhead, praised the heroic, split-second decision-making of our highly trained staff in emergency situations. It announced with great fanfare that the St. Michael's board had voted to create a new charitable fund, the K-9 Heroes Fund, to provide pro bono emergency care for injured police dogs, and that the hospital was proudly covering all costs associated with Rex's recovery. There was no mention of Elena's suspension. She watched it all unfold from her couch, Buster's head resting on her lap. Her phone was still buzzing, a relentless chorus of vindication. The threatening letter from the nursing board lay on her coffee table, now looking like a flimsy, powerless relic from a different lifetime. The war for public opinion was over. The battle for the truth had been won, and she was the victor. A week later, Elena Vance walked through the automatic doors of St. Michael's General Hospital, not as an employee and not as a pariah, but as an invited guest. She wore a simple black blazer and slacks, an armor of professional dignity. The difference in the atmosphere was staggering. The averted eyes were now replaced with open, smiling faces. Nurses she barely knew gave her a thumbs up as she passed. The whispers that followed her were no longer laced with accusation, but with awe. She was a living legend in the halls where, just days ago, she had been a disgrace. Her destination was the third-floor boardroom, a place of hushed tones and intimidatingly long mahogany tables she had never set foot in before. When she entered, the entire hospital board was present, a collection of the city's most powerful figures in medicine and finance. At the far end of the table, looking small and deeply uncomfortable in his perfectly tailored suit, sat Mr. Davies. He refused to meet her eye, focusing instead on a point on the wall just over her left shoulder. The chairman of the board, a formidable man named Arthur Prescott, stood to greet her. His smile was practiced, but his eyes held a glimmer of genuine respect. "Miss Vance," he began, gesturing for her to sit. "On behalf of the board of directors and the entire Street Michaels family, I want to offer our most sincere and profound apology." The words, so simple, yet so hard-won, washed over her. Prescott didn't mince words. He spoke of the hospital's failure to support her, of a rigid adherence to policy that had overshadowed their primary mission of compassionate care. It was a carefully worded speech, designed to absolve the institution while implicitly sacrificing one of its own. Mr. Davies visibly shrank with every word. "Therefore," Prescott continued, "we are formally rescinding your suspension and expunging this entire incident from your service record. It will be as if it never happened." He slid a file folder across the polished table towards her. "Furthermore, the board has unanimously voted to offer you the position of head nurse of the emergency department, effective immediately. We believe your demonstrated leadership, grace under pressure, and unwavering commitment to patient advocacy are precisely the qualities Street Michaels needs to champion." It was a checkmate, a promotion, a pay raise, a position of power. It was a bribe, a plea, and an offer of peace all rolled into one. The old Elena, the one who was jaded and just trying to get through her shift, would have been stunned into silence. The new Elena, the one forged in the crucible of the last week, found her voice. She looked not at Prescott, but directly at Mr. Davies, forcing him to finally meet her gaze. "I accept the position," she said, her voice clear and steady. "And my first act as head nurse will be to draft a new policy addendum, one that ensures that no employee of this hospital is ever punished for showing compassion. One that ensures that the first question we ask is not, 'What does the rulebook say?' but, 'How can we help?' Bureaucracy will no longer have a veto on saving a life in my ER. Is that understood?" A tense silence filled the room. Prescott broke it with a slow, deliberate nod. "Perfectly, Miss Vance. We wouldn't have it any other way." Davies just stared, his face pale, a man rendered obsolete by a courage he could never comprehend. An hour later, Elena walked out of the main entrance of the hospital. The meeting had been draining, the corporate maneuvering exhausting, but she felt a sense of clean, quiet victory. The sun was warm on her face. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, she could breathe. She started down the steps toward the parking lot, already thinking about the logistics of her new role, when she stopped dead. The sight before her stole the air from her lungs. Lined up along the entire length of the hospital's long, curved driveway and stretching down the adjacent street was a silent, formal procession of police cruisers. 10, 12, 15 of them. Their sirens were off, but their overhead lights were on, turning in a slow, hypnotic, synchronized rhythm of red and blue. It wasn't a barricade, it was an honor guard. Beside each vehicle stood a uniformed officer, their backs straight, their expressions solemn, all of them facing her. The city noise seemed to fade into a dull roar. There were no reporters, no crowds. This wasn't for the cameras. This was for her. As she stood there, frozen on the steps, the officer nearest her, a woman she'd never seen before, raised a white-gloved hand to the brim of her cap in a slow, deliberate salute. A moment later, the officer next to her did the same. Then the next, and the next, a silent, powerful wave of respect that rippled down the entire line of cars and officers. It was a gesture of profound gratitude, a quiet apology, a recognition that transcended words. From the lead car, Officer Ben Rodriguez stepped out, and beside him, walking with the barest trace of a limp, was Rex. His coat was brushed to a glossy sheen, his eyes were bright and alert, and his tail was a blur of unrestrained joy. A long, neat line of sutures traced a path across his shaved side, a proud scar marking him as a survivor. The moment he saw Elena, a soft whine escaped his throat. He broke protocol, pulling away from Rodriguez and trotting directly up the steps to her, his nails clicking on the concrete. He nudged his great head into her hand, his whole body wiggling with a happiness so pure it brought tears to her eyes. Elena sank to her knees, ignoring her blazer, and wrapped her arms around the dog's thick neck. Rex responded by bathing her face in sloppy, grateful kisses. All the tension, all the fear and anger and humiliation of the past week melted away in that moment. The boardrooms, the news reports, the hateful comments, they all became meaningless noise. This was the truth of it. This was why she'd done it. This simple, profound connection. Rodriguez walked up, a warm smile on his face. "He's been asking for you," he said quietly. He waited until she had composed herself before continuing. "I wanted you to be the first to know. The city council held an emergency session this morning with the police chief. They've ratified a new directive. It's officially called the Rex Protocol. Any K-9 officer injured in the line of duty is to be treated as a human officer regarding emergency medical transport and trauma care. You didn't just save him, Elena. You saved all of them from now on." The salute ended. The officers lowered their hands, their duty done. One by one, they returned to their vehicles. The silent, flashing lights were extinguished. With a final nod in her direction, the cruisers began to pull away, dispersing back into the city they served, leaving Elena alone on the steps with Rodriguez and the hero she had refused to abandon. She watched them go, the afternoon sun glinting off their windshields. Her life was not the same as it was a week ago. She was stronger, bolder, and she now had a department to run. But as she knelt there, her fingers buried in the thick fur of the dog who rested his head trustingly in her lap, she knew that her single, stubborn, unforgivable act of defiance hadn't been an act of career suicide. It had been an act of rebirth.